Thanks for joining us today to discuss life and godliness with Rick and Angela Carter. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, email us at carters4hope@gmail.com. That's Carters, the number 4, hope@gmail.com. Any questions you have, we'll discuss in future episodes. Right now, sit back and let's join in on the conversation. Good morning. It's a rainy day in Wyoming.
Yes.
We are in Douglas, Wyoming, unique town. A town that is the birthplace of the jackalope. And we did not know that till we got here.
Two brothers that were taxidermists invented it.
And so this is the jackalope. I'm sure most people have heard of the jackalope. This is where it is from. So that was pretty interesting. But we're doing a family conference here for Douglas Baptist Church, and it's been a great week. Tonight will be our last night, actually, in the conference, but we're looking forward to the rest of the day here and the services tonight. And then we'll be headed off to Tonasket, Washington. So we've got a couple days of travel starting tomorrow. And I think it's like 15 hours drive time. And with the fifth wheel, that takes a little extra time.
And in the mountain.
In the mountains. We're gonna be taking a little bit extra time, taking our time. I guess tomorrow we're going to drive maybe 7.5 hours.
Tomorrow will be our longest drive.
And then we'll break the next 10 hours up into 2 days. And so anyway, we're looking forward to that though as well, and getting to pull through the mountains. We're so excited about pulling through mountain roads.
Yeah, thrilled.
It'll be on the interstate, so it shouldn't be too bad. Most of it's on the interstate. Yeah. So anyway, we got a request for a topic today. And so the request was to talk about dealing with sickness in ministry. And that's something we literally know nothing about. Never been sick, never had any health issues.
If you are right with the Lord, you would never
That's a good point. Yeah, just be right with God, and you'll never be sick, ever, ever, ever. And ignore all the problems that the disciples went through in the New Testament, and the physical infirmities that Paul had, and so forth. Yeah, it's funny. It's a funny topic, isn't it? Because there is that sense that if someone's sick, A, it's judgment from God, or B, it's always spiritual warfare.
Right.
And
it can't just be life.
It can't be just that people get sick, right? It's got to be something more, nefarious. We said it at the same time. So
stop thinking like me.
don't worry. Don't worry about that.
Well,
anyway, so let's start with, can it be judgment? Well, certainly, because the Bible does talk about that in 1 Corinthians 11, where he says that if we take of the supper unworthily regarding sin in our heart and living in willful sin, then he says, for this cause many are sick, weak and sick, and many sleep. And so, that's certainly a possibility, but I think that if you're a conscientious Christian who wants to walk with God, that's unlikely. That would be more, in my mind, for those who take lightly the Lord and his supper and are willfully living in sin and making a mockery of the Lord's Supper. So I don't think that that's just like an accidental, I had this sin over here that I wasn't aware of, or something like that. I don't think that that's an accidental thing at all. Is it possible that it's demonic sickness? Well, it's possible. Was a good example of that. Paul even says he had a thorn in his flesh, a messenger of Satan, and it's possible that God allowed, in both circumstances, God allowed there to be a hindrance physically, it would seem, but for a specific purpose, for the purpose of them staying close to God. As a matter of fact, Job drew closer to the Lord, and God was able to teach him some things and deal with him about some things through sickness. And Paul also talked about how the Lord said, I'm not going to remove this from you, because essentially you need to remember that you're weak. And when you're weak, I'm strong. And that was a reminder in his life that he needed to depend on the Lord and not on himself. He had a past where he was very prideful, very full of self, very arrogant. And that was a constant reminder, that physical issue, whatever it was a constant reminder that he needed to depend on Christ. So is it possible that it's demonic? Yes, but in such a circumstance, the only illustrations we really have of a believer being afflicted like that is still within the confines of the will of God, and not as a punishment, more as a cause to bring them closer to him, and or also a way for us to be able to magnify God in our sickness, as opposed to it being some kind of a judgment or just the spiritual warfare where Satan has all this power and he's afflicting us. Like, no believer, I don't think any believer is afflicted by Satan without God's allowance in that. And so there's this there's a sense there that, is it possible? Yes, but what would be the purpose there? And the purpose would still be for our growth and for God's glory. So it wouldn't be in the same, like as if it were just you fighting this spiritual battle that somehow God has turned you over for some reason, in that sense, that would be, again, more nefarious. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, even in all of those examples, they didn't let their health issues keep them from serving the Lord.
Right. And there's many illustrations in the scriptures of people that were sick, and it wasn't spiritual warfare, and it wasn't judgment. It was life. It was
part of life. Yeah.
Part of sickness, and sickness sometimes is even unto death. And that Paul talks about his servant being sick, and then one of the men that visited being sick, and he doesn't talk about it as, Satan really was attacking and he was sick, or God's judgment was on him. He just said, pray for him. He's sick. Sickness does happen. And I think sickness happens far more in a general sense, because we live in a world of sin where the curse of sin impacts everybody.
And it's been decaying longer than it was even back then.
Of course
so it gets worse
the
longer we go.
So I think the big danger comes mentally when we are constantly looking for a cause or a reason or something like that, where we make it more than just what it is. I think even if it's spiritual attack, the answer is the same. That you keep your heart focused on the Lord. You seek to bring him glory through the circumstance. It's like there's no difference if it's spiritual attack or if it's just that you got sick. It's the same answer in that sense. Now, if you know that there's some sin that you are harboring, and it's a known sin to you, then you just need to confess it and get it right. That would be a clear answer to that. But aside from that, just the fact of sickness is something that we have to just accept as, okay, it's part of the curse of sin in the world. And whether it's just that or it is spiritual, the answer is I need to draw close to the Lord. I need to seek to give him glory in the midst of this and allow him to have preeminence in my life, whether I'm well or whether I'm sick.
Right.
So in honesty, we have experienced a lot of sickness in our life.
Yeah.
Not just us individually, but also with our family. And there's been a lot of different weird.
The running joke is, if someone gets sick or has an injury or whatever, ask Miss Angela. She
knows about everything.
Because we've experienced just probably almost a lot.
Not everything.
I started to say everything, but that would be an exaggeration. And I don't want to experience everything.
No, we don't have a need to say. No, we do not want that. But we have had, let's see, I'm trying to think back to early days. We've had miscarriages, and I think we had 3 miscarriages. We had, Angela has had health issues regarding ladies' issues and so forth like that we've had to go through, and she would say, I say we, and I mean we had to go through them.
What are you saying?
You know what I'm saying. They say when a woman is in the worst pains of childbirth, she can almost experience what it's like for a man to have a fever.
Almost.
It's close. Anyway, but we had, Angela's had health issues. I've had health issues, various different things. I was told once that I had cancer, like on a phone call, at a random test. You tested positive, and I'm like, for what? And they said, cancer, just over the phone. That was awesome. Then I had to go through all kinds of tests to verify that I didn't have cancer because the second test came back as I didn't. And they said, well, it could be a false negative. So then we went through a whole battery of invasive tests. But then I have celiac, which is misunderstood. A lot of times, a lot of people say it's a gluten allergy. It's actually an autoimmune disease. Somehow my body interprets the presence of gluten as a virus,
foreign object,
and it attacks my body somehow. And for me, and it's different. Celiac is kind of a different response for most people. I mean, it's not always exactly the same.
Everybody has a different response.
Right.
Yeah.
So for me, it's it comes in the form of real severe joint pain and muscle fatigue. And so when I found out what I had, they actually were testing me for RA, and I was to the point where I couldn't hold a pencil with my or a pen with my fingers because I couldn't grip, and my muscles and my joints were so bad. So that's the primary response I have, but other people have all kinds of intestinal issues and
brain fog.
But that is, so we found that out kind of a little bit later. I was in my late 30s when we found that out. But earlier than that, the disease thing we dealt with was diabetes. Our youngest son, when he was 2 years old, was diagnosed with diabetes. We thought, the doctors were like, well, who in your family had diabetes?
Nobody.
No, you're wrong. Somebody had it. You just don't know. Well, it turns out diabetes is an autoimmune disease in the same family as celiac. So my son got that from me, even though I didn't have diabetes, but he got the autoimmune.
And you hadn't showed signs yet of it, so.
Right. So we dealt with that from the time he was 2 years old.
Yeah.
And that was challenging. That was very challenging because it changed at the time, changed his personality completely, because he went from being very, very happy baby, very happy child to
now mom's hurting me every day,
stuck with a pin.
Yeah. That's a joy.
It was difficult, and it was a challenge for him. Really, has been throughout his whole life. People with type 1 diabetes, it's not just diet. You can't control it with diet. And especially the problem is
you can't just control it with sugar-free stuff.
Older people had this, especially in our church, older folks who had type 2 diabetes felt sorry for him. And they were constantly stuffing his pockets with sugar-free candy, which is bad for him. We were and so here we are constantly having to take candy away from a baby.
And I'm poking him with a needle. So
and it was like made 10 times worse. And everybody told us how we could just fix it by changing his diet. And it's like, that's not this type. You're wrong. And anyway.
It was a joy.
It was not a joy. It was annoying and frustrating. And it was difficult. It really was.
And then the whole time trying to help him understand why he has it, why he has diabetes, and not be mad at God, and not be,
that was a difficult process,
mad at us and mad at life. And
a couple years into the process, we were having dinner, and
I wondered if you'd tell that.
I'm going to tell this story because I think it illustrates, you're going to be shocked at this story, okay? But it does illustrate the struggle we go through when we deal with disease in our life, and especially from a standpoint of immaturity. We're sitting at the table one night, and I said,
now mind you, I have to take him at least once a month to the diabetes doctor. And at this point, we were taking him more often because he was still fairly new at it.
Well, he was not quite, he was 3 years old. He'd had it for about a year.
Yeah, but it's still in that early years, there was still a lot of it. His body was still trying to kick out insulin once in a great while. And so anyways, long story short, I would have to take all the kids with me to the diabetes doctor. Yeah. So they sat through all of the training. They sat through all of the doctor visits. They've heard all of this stuff.
Yeah. And Seth is our youngest. And so we said I think it was the 1 year mark. He was late. He was almost 3 when he got diabetes, so he'd have been almost 4 at this point. And I said, so we're going to go around the table and we're going to talk about how our view of diabetes and has changed over this last year. And so we started with my oldest daughter, Eternity. She was set on my right, and it'd be her, Charity, Angela, Jeshua, and then Seth would be closest to me. So we were going around this way. He was going to be the last one to speak. And so I said to Eternity, tell me what you think concerning this issue of diabetes. And she goes, I'm thankful that Seth has diabetes, because we have learned that God can take care of us even when we have sickness, and that God can still take care of us. So I'm like, okay. And Charity, she said something similar to that, like, it's diabetes has helped us learn how we can tell others about Jesus when we have sickness, but we can tell others. And Jeshua, he said basically the same thing. And it gets to Seth, and he's just been sitting there watching everybody the whole time.
I can still see his face.
And he said, Seth, what do you think of diabetes? And he says, I think God should have diabetes and get a shot in his butt. That's so irreverent, and Angela's laughing here.
I was like, what?
It was shocking to us.
But he was 3.
He was 3. He didn't understand. All he understood was, it hurts me. And why did God do this? You're all saying, we're glad God did this. Well, why did God do this? I think God should have to go through this. And in the mind of a 3-year-old, that made perfect sense. And to be honest with you, I think a lot of people never get past that.
That's true. I think they stay there.
And it's difficult to deal with illness. It's difficult to deal with long-term sickness, and even such as diabetes, where it can be maintained and you can live a relatively normal life.
Right.
But it's a constant maintenance and a constant battle, and
it's a constant reminder every day.
And feeling bad when your blood sugar's high or low, or the danger of it, and it's hard. It was hard for him. It's still hard for him. It was hard for us. And then as our other kids grew, they all developed illnesses, autoimmune illnesses as well. His was very early. Our oldest daughter has lupus and POTS and another autoimmune disease that I can't pronounce. Our second daughter has gone through so many different testing, and they still don't quite know what she has, but she has a problem with her long nerves where her autoimmune attacks her nerves, and she'll go completely numb in her extremities, and it works its way toward
these blisters in her mouth.
Yeah, so she has those issues. Our oldest son Jeshua has
hypoglycemic,
and so he's kind of on the opposite end of
his brother,
the blood sugar of his brother, and that actually happened kind of just recently. We felt like it was probably the case for a while, but it became more pronounced recently. So on all of that, on top of just normal health, Charity had spinal meningitis and was in the hospital for that, and all the kids went through RSV and hospitalized for various different sicknesses over time. So we've been through a lot of illnesses. Not all of them, praise the Lord, but through a lot of them. And what I can say about all of that process is, and I don't say this with any hyperbole or attempt to be uber spiritual, is just that God's been faithful through all of it. There's been no time in any of it that God hasn't been there to protect and to guide, to give us wisdom, to give us strength. We decided early on that sickness wasn't going to keep us from serving the Lord, that it's just part of life.
It wasn't going to define us.
No, absolutely not going to define us. I know people maybe know that we have had sicknesses, but I'm not going to
we don't wear them as a label or a badge of honor, or
it's not who we are. It's just something we've gone through.
Yeah.
Everybody goes through stuff. So through it all, we've sought to ask, okay, Lord, what can we learn from this? And we've learned a lot on a spiritual level, and we've learned a lot on a personal level. How can we seek to bring glory to God in the midst of this? We've witnessed to lots of doctors and nurses. Most recently we went through the situation with Millie, our granddaughter, Caden, our grandson, who both went through health scares just right at birth, and our kids witnessed to the nurses and doctors, because that's what they learn to do. That's
and that's what we tried to teach them, and that's what we tried to look at. Okay, obviously this was God's plan for our life and our family. So God didn't give it to us to hinder our walk with him or hinder our witness for him. So we just got to learn how to do that through this, and just look for opportunities and look for ways, and all right, how can God use this,
Yeah. And in the midst of it, I think the key for us on a personal level has been that we don't focus on the sickness. We focus on the Lord in the midst of sickness. We focus on walking with the Lord and maintaining a personal devotional life. We talked about that before in these, but I think it's such a key to getting through any trial is that your walk with God has to be consistent. You cannot let sickness draw you away from God. You've got to let all things draw you to God.
Right.
I said this I wrote in the book Triumph from Trials that I wrote. I wrote that nothing that draws me closer to God is bad for me. And every bad thing can draw me closer to God if I am willing to allow it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key, whether it's sickness or just trauma or trouble, no matter what it is that my mind has to be that God is going to teach me something through this. I'm going to grow closer to him. I'm going to let it draw me close to him.
Yeah.
And not push me away. And that's a decision that we make in our heart, right? That's not an accident. It's a determination. And I think that that's the key thing that you have to be mindful of is having to make that determination before things start, really.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we determined that. I mean, we determined that before we got married. That was one of the things that we talked about, before we even got engaged, was like, we want to serve the Lord. We want this to be our life and our focus and all of that. And then when we had kids and then we went through counseling and all of that just solidified that decision even more. It was like, okay, this is what we had decided and we're not going to let anything keep us from doing this.
Right.
And serving the Lord.
Right. For me, part of that was growing up, seeing how my parents responded to trials. Mm-hmm. My mom experienced a lot of illness early in my life in the sense of my mom's celiac. That's where I get it from. We didn't know what that was at the time.
And probably looking back now,
a lot of her sickness probably had to do with that. But looking back, when I remember when I was in a freshman or 8th grade and then a freshman in high school, we were living in a town. My mom had a bad allergic reaction to a factory that was in town. And so she would have to leave during the weekday and come back on the weekend when it was shut down. And, there was a lot of sickness that she had. And, we just moved. I mean, we kept serving the Lord. I mean, it wasn't like, and what we ended up doing, my dad had started a church there. There was he needed to bring someone in to, so it didn't just collapse. There was a building and various things. So he did bring another preacher in and we moved on from there. But it was just kind of like viewed as, hey, we're going to serve the Lord. We're not quitting because we have a health hindrance. We may make adjustments as necessary. We don't beat ourselves up for not being able to do certain things. If we can't do it, we can't do it. God knows what we can do and God knows what we can't do. But we're just going to continue serving the Lord because that's what life is. Life is about serving God. And so I grew up with that mentality, and it seems like that's just to me, that's the normal way a Christian ought to view health issues.
But I know, like, when I had my knee replacement and my hip replacement, just being limited and not being able to do what I had done before.
It affects you emotionally.
Yeah, I struggled emotionally, and probably was a bit depressed because of it. But it was part of that. Looking back now, I know it was part of the healing. Your body gets thrown into, gets out of whack. Your hormones get out of whack. All of those chemicals get out of whack. So I know part of that was that. But then also part of it too was just, like you said, me bringing my thinking back underneath. Okay, so that was what God had for me then. God has something different for me now. I just have to learn how to adapt and adjust to what he has for me now.
Well, I think that, you raise an interesting point there, and I think an important one, that there's times when sickness impacts the physical body and the physical body impacts the way we think.
Sure.
That is a reality, and we know this because of diabetes. When a diabetic has their blood sugar out of whack, they don't think
they're
right.
unreasonable. Really,
they don't think right. It literally changes the way they think. Their blood sugar being high or their blood sugar being low.
And we're not justifying their actions or their attitudes or whatever, but it is a reality.
Absolutely, it's a reality. And when you're sick for a prolonged period of time, if you have a major physical trauma, your physical body releases different chemicals to cope with the pain. And then there is a grieving type
Yeah, I felt like
response.
that I was grieving. I felt
But
like
it
I
doesn't-
went through all the stages of grief.
But it doesn't
actually.
make conscious sense when that's going on, because it's like, well, no one's died, so why do I feel this way?
Just my knee.
But people go through that when they
Yeah.
have organ transplant
transplants.
or things like that. There's a literal physical grieving and depressive state that takes place from the chemical reaction in your body.
Yeah. Or
And-
if you have to lose an organ or.
And that also happens if you've gone through. I think preachers go through this sometimes weekly,
Oh,
where
yeah,
they
we
have
just talked about this.
where we have this emotional high of Sunday, maybe a big day, maybe something you've been dealing with, and
You've
then
been studying all week for, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, big.
this culmination, and then it's over, and then Monday you're physically exhausted and you're mentally exhausted, and you have the dopamine letdown that, from the high to the low, and the body has to reset. And, it
And
can
we talked about that, a lot of preachers on
want to quit.
Yeah, on Monday. Yeah. And that's why, because you have the letdown and
Right.
we don't always associate it
And sickness
that way.
My point is, sickness can be the same. It can create a physical letdown, emotional letdown, grief type response, and then we we feel that way, and then we respond to how we feel as opposed to doing what's right.
So, from the spouse's perspective, helping the one who's struggling with that through it.
So when Angela was going through her knee replacement, her hip replacement, and emotional struggle through that, I read her the scriptures. I prayed with her, for her. I would tell her to pray. She's like, I don't want to pray. I don't want to pray. I don't want to read my Bible.
I don't feel good.
I don't feel good. Yeah. And
I'm a terrible sick person.
she's the worst. Yep. She's the worst. It's bad.
I didn't used to be
It's
when
bad.
the kids were
I took a vow not to
Hey!
say who was the worst,
Hey!
but it's Ann.
when the kids were little, I didn't have time to be sick or to milk it. And now I'm like, okay.
She's making
Take care of me.
up for it. No, it's just that way when you
We just don't feel good.
don't feel good, you don't want to do
Yeah.
things. But the reality is when you don't feel good, it's the most important time
To do it.
to do it. It's like, and I say this in churches, I really think that people misunderstand devotions, because it's like there's this idea of, well, every day when I do my devotions, I'm supposed to have this feeling, now, and I think people kind of associate the idea with God speaking to me as a feeling. God speaking to me is not a feeling. It's me having a recognition of something God said and taking time to consider it. That's not a feeling. That's a action, behavior, right? But people will get this idea of, well, if I don't have this feeling, then God didn't speak to me. It's like, that has nothing to do with it. Or I read my Bible and I don't get this sensation or this feeling, and therefore I'm not communing with God. And it's like, we call it devotions, not feelings. We call it devotions because it's about being devoted to God. It's about being obedient to God. And sometimes God allows us to experience wonderful emotions while we're being obedient. And sometimes God lets us just be devoted and withholds maybe that emotional response, because are we doing it for the feelings, or are we doing it because we're obedient to God, because we love him, because we want to show him our devotion? And I think that when we are down, it's more important, even when it's not that it's never not important, but it's more important that we're devoted to our relationship with God when we're down than at any other time. And I think Job illustrates that. It's easy when you're sick to pull away from people and to pull away from God and to try and isolate yourself, because you don't feel focus on self. You don't feel good, and that's normal. And yet at the same time, it's destructive to you personally. It's destructive spiritually, because there's things you can learn in sickness and in weakness that you can't learn any other place.
Right. Yes. And you, just from the pastoral perspective, when we go through those times, when I went through the knee replacement, the hip replacement, I understood a little bit more about what the older people in our church were talking about. Well, I just can't do what I used to do, and how they were upset about it or sad about it. I understood that.
Or the pain, the pain for a year with your knee replacement. You were in pain for a year.
So I get that. I understand, more fully what they were saying.
Yeah.
And so then you can minister better to them because you do have an understanding.
Yeah, and on top of the physical pain, it was the pain of paying the bill. Goodness
Oh,
gracious, it
gosh.
was expensive.
Insurance
So-
is stupid.
When I found out how much replacement parts were going to be, I thought about trading her in on a new model, but I do love the classics. She loves that joke.
Oh, so retarded.
It's a reality of aging, arthritis.
We're not young anymore.
We are young.
We're young.
50 is the new 40,
Yeah.
and
Uh-huh.
and 9 p.m. is the new midnight.
For us, anyways.
Anyway, it is a process where, and I think that's the beauty of the marriage relationship is when you are down. I think back over our years, and I think most people would be this way. It's rare. I'm not saying never, but it's really rare that you've been down and I've been down at the same time.
Yeah, no, that would be terrible if we both were.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that, but it is funny how often, like, Angela will be down, so I'll encourage her, and then
Then
then she'll get up, and so I'll get down. She's like, "Wait a minute, you're not allowed to be down."
Yeah.
It's it goes both ways. It's an emotional stabilizing
you don't even
factor.
have to have a reason to be down. Your body just sometimes feels down
Sometimes it's just rainy in your
for
soul.
days. I need sunshine.
For Angela, it is
Oh.
it is very much
Yeah.
sunshine related,
Yeah.
and I do think physical exercise matters. I
Yes.
think our diet matters. I
gonna
think
say
all of
that.
those things matter
Yeah.
for health, and I think avoiding highly processed foods and lots of sugars and stuff like that instead of
Mm-hmm.
more healthy dietary choices. I think overall the culmination of that affects your
Yes.
physical health, but also your mood and your thoughts and
Yeah.
all of that. I know whenever living in Oklahoma during the winter when there's less sunshine, and it's not like there's none, there's just less, or it's cold.
And it's
So
so
when
cold
you're
you can't
out,
go
you're
out.
not. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not like Oklahoma gets that cold compared to some places.
It is when your body's full of arthritis.
Well, and that's part of it. But I know that Angela often needs an extra dose of vitamin C, SEA,
Yes. For weeks.
for recovery purposes. The sun,
We can take it off our taxes.
the sun makes such a big difference in her mood.
It really does make a huge difference for me.
And since our son's moved out, we got to get her out in the actual sun.
Yes.
So
No, but seriously, I going back to the knee and the hip, I was so down, but I know when I finally started physical therapy, my spirit started to lift some, and I think for two reasons. One, I was exercising, and so just the natural chemical release of the body, but two, I was seeing progress, hey, wait a minute, I'm not going to be an invalid for the rest of my life. I can do something. I am strengthened in these things.
actually, now that we're through, it's been over a year now,
Over a year for the knee, and
coming up on a year for the hip.
yeah, August is a year for the hip.
And the knee was where the most pain, the hip replacement was,
Piece of cake.
comparatively,
Yeah.
and the pain wise.
Yeah.
I mean, we do everything we did before, and without her, there was, for a long time, it was like, I got to warm my knee up. My knee hurts.
Yeah.
And that pain.
We do everything we used to do, and I'm back to our touring pace.
We're not as we need to get, we've been talking about this lately. We've got to get to walking more
More.
consistently. And,
But, I'm more purposed with my steps. I make sure I'm stepping flat. I'm really paying a little bit more attention because I don't want to hurt the new joints and go through that again.
but I do think that the physical exercise matters. We'll
It
talk about
does.
that more. We've got another request to talk about dealing with depression and so forth, and we'll talk about that more. We'll talk about that again when we
Sure.
talk about that, because
I
they're
was just saying that
related,
that it
but-
kind of gave me that knowledge that, hey, I am not broken. I can do things, and kind of help put that lie out of my head.
Actually, that statement's interesting, because I think if any way that Satan impacts us when we're sick, a lot of it is the lie.
That's
God-
why reading the scriptures.
God's against you. There's,
Yeah.
people, you can't do this. You'll never be better. You'll never, all that. And yeah, absolutely. That's why being in the Word,
And I think
praying.
you were really patient with me most of the time. There was a couple
You heard
of times.
that. That's recorded.
There was a
That's
couple of
recorded.
times. No, you were patient with me and just kept reminding me even, every day, kept reminding me that it will get better. We'll get better. Don't it's temporary is temporary. And I know not every illness is temporary, but just reminding them that, hey, God loves you. It's
Ultimately,
gonna be
every
okay.
illness is temporary. Eventually you die.
Well, there's that.
There's hope. If you're saved, that's hope. Anyway, ultimately, the main takeaway I think that we have to have is that in spite of sickness, God's still good.
Yeah.
And he can use these things to teach us. He can use these things to grow us. And there are people that I'm able to minister to because of my experiences with illness that I would not otherwise be able to minister to. There are ways I can minister because we've been through things that would be less received by people who have physical issues than had we not gone through them. So ultimately, all of these things have made us better able ministers for the Lord. And I think that really has to be the key that you look at, is that God's preparing me to minister to somebody. I don't know how, I don't know when, but I need to learn what God has for me here.
Right.
I need to learn to be faithful to him in spite of sickness so that I can help someone else who may not have learned that yet. I may be the teacher that God needs in their life for them to hear what they need. I think that's just such an important part of the approach, right? The approach to how to deal with that illness is for the glory of God. And
Just keep reminding yourself that the Lord's good.
yeah, absolutely. So anyway, if you do have a request for another topic you'd like us to talk about,
Carter's, the number 4, hope@gmail.com.
and you got it down.
I know now.
Anyway, I don't know if you could hear, it's rainy,
Today.
but it was a
It's
beautiful
cloudy.
area up here. And actually,
It was gorgeous.
there's some kind of mountainy peaks over here out this view. And then we went up to a place called the Natural Bridge.
Ayers Natural Bridge.
Yeah, and it was a really beautiful park. Anyway, we've enjoyed being here in Wyoming, and we're in the part of Wyoming that's not just wind. There is a part of Wyoming that is uber windy. Yeah. But we're in a part over here on the eastern side on I-25 where it's just, not that it doesn't get windy, but it's just not quite as windy. Anyway, we've really enjoyed our time here. This is the first time we've spent time in Wyoming and not just tried to get through it. And so
It's true.
we've enjoyed our time here, but we look forward to talking to you again next week, and we hope you all have a blessed week.